Hey everyone, my name is Lizzie and today we'll be talking about things that work against the yeast. More specifically, we have 4 things, and the first one is preservatives. So preservatives inhibit yeast growth, but they don't kill the yeast unless the preservatives are specifically added to your wash, like Camden tablets. This would kill the yeast. Preservatives are found in Coke and other sodas. We also have them in juice. And if you want to make alcohol from Coke, an experiment that I've tried recently, it did not work, and I believe that the main factor were because of preservatives. A solution to work against these preservatives was to start with a yeast starter. And this means that you would take water and sugar and you would put the yeast in. That way the yeast will multiply beforehand. So once you put it inside the soda, the yeast has already multiplied. Therefore, once it's in the soda and preservatives, the yeast won't multiply, but at least it has already multiplied from the beginning and it will do its work. So that's a solution that was found in order to make alcohol from sodas. And going along with this suggestion is that you would have to keep adding yeast on every time during your fermentation because the yeast doesn't multiply, so you would need eventually more yeast to come in to eat the remainder of the sugar. The second suggestion that I'm about to talk about is to air out your soda. I tried this, so I aired out the soda, left it out for 3 to 4 days. That way the spirit would evaporate, I thought, along with the preservatives. And the logic to airing it out is when your soda is in contact with oxygen molecules, this would lead to a new composition. With this new composition, it would be more favorable to yeast. Did this work for me? The answer is no. I tried to put yeast in Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola includes 3 main preservatives, which are sodium benzoate. This decreases yeast growth. We also have potassium benzoate and potassium sorbate. Potassium sorbate also decreases the growth of yeast cells. It's not really working in our favor when we put yeast inside sodas. Although I'd like to mention that recently I put a little food coloring in my alcohol, and at the end I read the ingredients and it did include one of these 3 preservatives, sodium benzoate. However, I must say that the fermentation seems like it's going well. The reason why it's going well, in my opinion, is that it's not filled with preservatives. I just put little dashes of food coloring inside the whole fermenting jar. Therefore, the preservatives are not overpowering the yeast since there's just a little quantity inside. The second element that works against yeast is temperature. Why temperature? Because when the temperature is too hot, it kills the yeast, and when it's too cold, the yeast becomes dormant. They just sink to the bottom of the jar and they do nothing. So they don't eat sugar. They're not really doing much. Just like in the winter, people just hibernate. More specifically, when the temperature reaches 120 Fahrenheit or 49 degrees Celsius, that's when the yeast starts to die off. And it becomes dormant when the environment is cold. So this could be in the range of your fridge's temperature. So if you're scared of yeast jars exploding because there's yeast and there might be a little bit of sugar left over, you could just put your jars in the fridge and there's a low risk of exploding because the yeast is no longer active. It's dormant once it's in the fridge because of the cold temperature, and there won't be glass shattering, unlike glass shattering in people's basements. So the reason why there might be some glass shattering once the temperature is at a decent level, it's because when there's leftover yeast and leftover sugar, it produces alcohol and CO2 as well. And the optimal fermentation temperature is around 26 degrees Celsius. Based on this YouTuber called Barley and Hops, we have other articles called Science Direct, and they recommend 28 to 33 degrees Celsius. Another website called brewthis.com suggests 15 to 24 degrees Celsius. But I would say, honestly, it really depends on the yeast that you use. So recently I've used the EC1118 yeast, and at the back of the packet, it recommends 35 degrees Celsius. And different yeast packages will have different temperatures that they're suggesting. However, if they don't, I would suggest the regular 26 degrees Celsius in order to make sure that your fermentation is at optimal temperatures. And if you'd like yeast suggestions, I have many in the description below. You can click on them and purchase the one that you'd like. The third aspect that can influence yeast is pH. And for those who don't know, Coca-Cola is acid. We have here a chart or a little diagram of acid versus more alkaline elements. And the optimal pH level for fermentation is at 5.2. One of my first washes, I put lemon inside the wash. I even squeezed lemon and it made the wash really acid. It was around 2 or 3. level of pH. So in order to bring it up to 5.2, I added baking soda. However, this affected the taste. It made it taste like baking soda. It was really not good. I had to throw the wash. So I would not recommend a baking soda. And just so you know, the pH changes as the days go by. So the fermentation on day 1 will have a certain pH, and as the days go by, so after a few days, after a few weeks, your pH will not stay exactly at the same level unless you add a pH stabilizer. There are things called a pH stabilizer where they will leave the pH at 5.2 for the duration of your fermentation. And if in case you want to just measure your pH just to verify if it's at an optimal level or not, we have pH strips or a digital pH meter that you can use in order to determine this. We also have links in the description below for pH testers. So if I'm able to bring up the pH, let's say my wash is too acid, if I'm able to bring up the pH to 5.2 without affecting the taste, I would for sure keep it. However, if the taste is affected, what's the point? If it's not delicious, it's not worth keeping alcohol that is undrinkable. So I thought of other options that can be added to pH other than baking soda in order to optimize the pH levels, and this includes calcium carbonate. By the way, calcium carbonate, for those who don't know, the street name is chalk. If you've eaten chalk before, let me know how that tastes, because this doesn't seem very appetizing, and I would not suggest drinking something that you would put chalk inside. It just seems toxic. And another option is to add pickling lime. So contrarily to what the word may seem, it doesn't taste like lime, it's a sort of powder, and it's used to make pickles crunchy. However, going on the internet led me into a rabbit hole, and it says that pickling lime can lead to botulism. So for those who don't know what botulism is, it's a rare, serious illness that can lead to paralysis. So it's flavorless, therefore it won't affect the taste of your alcohol, but it can lead to illnesses. So I would not suggest pickling lime either. In the end, honestly, if we're unable to change the pH and make the alcohol ferment, I would honestly just use a new batch instead of risking poison. A fourth element that affects yeast is sugar. If there's too much sugar, your yeast gets stressed. Just like workers, if there's too much work, they would just get stressed and not know what to do, where to start, where to finish. And for those who are just beginning in home brewing, if you haven't listened to anything else in this video, just keep this in mind. So the more sugar you add into your wash, the more alcohol you'll get. More sugar does not equate to more sweetness. More sugar equals more alcohol, because the yeast transforms the sugar into alcohol and CO2. What actually affects the taste of the sugar is yeast. So there are different types of yeast. There are wine yeast, there's champagne yeast, there's rum yeast, there's turbo yeast for those adventurous ones. Usually turbo yeast leads to off flavors, but it gives you quick alcohol. So there's different strains of yeast that can lead to different flavors. So going back to the sugar, and if there's too much sugar in your wash, the yeast gets stressed. And as a beginner, what I would do, I would always add the most sugar possible, because I wanted to make the strongest alcohol possible. What's the point of drinking 3% alcohol? I'd rather reach around 15 to 20. And the first wash that I made, there was so much sugar that when I used the hydrometer, there's a scale, and it was floating below the scale. So it couldn't even fit on the scale. I put so much sugar that the hydrometer couldn't even understand what was happening. Therefore, I had to dilute it and split that wash into 2 separate ones. So had I kept that same wash without diluting it, the yeast would have probably been stressed, and that could lead to off flavors. So your starting gravity, when you measure the sugar, the amount of sugar in your liquid, it should hover around the green area or the blue area. That's the optimal sugar levels. And what this hydrometer does, that you can purchase in the description below, this hydrometer tells you how much sugar your liquid has in comparison to water. Water being at 1.000 gravity, and your hydrometer will float low inside the water, and you'll just see a little tip on the surface. This means that there's no sugar inside the water. So when you want to look at the amount of sugar, the lower your hydrometer is in the liquid, the less sugar there is, and the higher it floats in the liquid, the more sugar it has and the more potential alcohol you can produce. If you're looking to make something around 5%, you just want to add a little bit of sugar. And if you're looking to make up to 20% alcohol, because yeast strains go to maximum 20%, it's rare to have 35%. I've never seen 35% yeast. So the maximum you can make is around 20. And if you'd like to have a stronger percentage alcohol, then you would have to distill it. Distilling, you would need a machine for that. So here we're just talking about fermentation. And Your hydrometer and the amount of sugar are super important in determining your percentage of alcohol. So you need to know this at the beginning. It's always good to measure your gravity at the beginning before pitching the yeast. Therefore, as the fermentation days go by, you can say if the amount of sugar has changed, that fermentation is working and that alcohol is being produced. If you don't know how much your starting gravity is, there's no way to determine if your fermentation is working, if there's alcohol, if there's less sugar, because you don't have a initial base of measurement. And the sources of sugar vary. There's yellow sugar, white sugar, you have honey. You can also have juice with no preservatives or very little. You can squeeze fresh fruits. There's rice, grains, corn, barley, and depending on what sugar source you use, the alcohol that you'll make will be different. For example, if you want to make rum, you can use molasses. If you want to make beer, you can use grains. If you want to make cider, you can use apples or pears. If you want to make sake, you can use rice. And it's odd because rice is not as sweet as honey. You can tell that there's a huge difference, and this will influence the percentage of alcohol that you can obtain at the end. Because the more sugar you have, the more potential alcohol you can create. And I've made washes where I've put more than 1 kilogram of sugar. And don't you worry, when you taste it at the end, it does not taste like diabetes. The leftover sugar is transformed into alcohol. And if you'd like a step-by-step process on how to make this alcohol with the recipe that I use, there's a link in the description below. You can book a class. And if you found this video valuable, don't forget to share with a friend, like, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.